In our bizarre 2024 election cycle, we've had a failing Democratic ticket be replaced at the last second with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz as the vice presidential nominee. We have Kamala Harris evidently winning in the polls for days, and then all of a sudden we've gone about 10 days without new polling at the national level. Very odd development, but a lot of people may be asking themselves, well, what is the reason why, for example, Kamala has now been inaugurated and blessed with 3 whole weeks of no press conferences and intense interviews, and we see this as maybe she's nursing a lead, or maybe there's a bigger play at hand, or maybe JD Vance is sinking the campaign for Donald Trump. What is it? Let's get to the bottom of this issue. So as we all know, Kamala Harris has basically been buddy-buddy with the mainstream media, as are a lot of Democrats. So you can see where my bias is really getting in here. But the point being is that, you're supposed to do your friends a solid. So, for example, Obama would obviously do all sorts of interviews, even when he was beating McCain by a ton. Now, Kamala and her supporters are saying that she is beating Trump handsomely, which is to say, okay, well, then why not, do Anderson Cooper a solid, Don Lemon, whoever, and do an interview? But she's not. But the person that is, though, is JD Vance. Why do I bring this up? JD Vance is being posited as the attack dog by Politico, again, a liberal slanted news organization, as are most, absent maybe Fox News. The point being, though, obviously, is that JD Vance right now is doing a lot of interviews, and you could say grunt work that Donald Trump is not doing. Donald Trump is also taking a little bit of a backstage insofar as like actively going on interviews like George Stephanopoulos and these types, kind of awaiting these debates hopefully next month. And so really the dynamic of the race is super awkward because, like I said, if you look at the polling, there hasn't been any new stuff. In fact, there hasn't been a single poll added in the past 4 days in the general election, which is odd because, again, this is like the biggest news in the country every 4 years. And yet, even though we're literally less than 3 months away from this election, they're not funding polls, which is super concerning, super concerning. Anyway, so right now, Harris has been frozen at leading Trump for the better part of a week, even though that's not normal. We ought to have a fluctuating number here every day or two. So it's a very odd thing. That being said, though, let's look into why JD Vance is defending himself. Because if you look into the math here, it's not the greatest, okay? So, Donald Trump picked JD Vance under the pretense of, okay, Joe, you're losing by a lot, so I don't need to pick a Glenn Youngkin. I don't need to pick a moderate. I can pick somebody who is younger, who I can groom into the guy I want to lead the country in like 5 years from now. But all of a sudden, it seems to be a little more troubling of a prospect when the guy has unfavorability that is worse than Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is not known as America's sweetheart. He is not a Ronald Reagan figure when it comes to being appealing to everyone. Okay. He may be older than Reagan was, but Reagan had this like comfy energy that Trump does not have, And so anyway, Donald is actually down by 8.2 in disfavorable spread. And so that's not great. Kamala, through a bunch of facelifts when it comes to public approval, apparently is actually down to -6, which again is not great, but is still better than Donald Trump's. And mind you, she was at -17 in tow with Joe Biden not even 2 months ago. And so all this in mind, let's look into JD. Again, he's at -9.4. That's an awful result. You look at when he was first picked and his unfavorability rating was at -4 or +4, actually. Now, not many people knew him. You see this, obviously, not even 60% of the country even knew who he was. That being said, he was all right, kind of benign. You give it a week to cook, and he's still up by 5. Now, as more people know who he is, the unfavorability goes up a ton, which is odd. So now all of a sudden his unfavorability is at -0.94. And actually, he was always down by 4. I misread that. So Joe Biden moment there. But anyway, the point being is that he seems to be a net liability. Now, whereas Tim Walz has a positive approval rating of anywhere from like 10 to 15, JD has a negative one of about 10, which is bad because, again, if he's lower than Trump, then he's sagging him down, okay? And that's too bad. But this feeds into the whole narrative of the race. And so as we see that there's been a desert of polling, it's time for people like me who's been obsessing over this the whole time to say, okay, well, what's the tea leaves? What is exactly going on here? Because we can see that the race is shaping on different vectors that a lot of people don't grasp. And so we're going to get more into detail. If we look at the headlines right now, you'll notice that JD Vance gets mostly negative coverage, which, to be fair, obviously he's a Republican. That tends to happen. But the point is that he seemingly is on the back foot. What the media is doing right now is that they're getting the worst things he's ever said over the past several years, take it back all the way to 2015 or something, and they're going to say, well, you said something about cat ladies and something, you know. So they have him on the back foot. Now, the difference with JD and frankly any of the other three politicians running for either VP or Prez is that he's actually doing the most amount of interviews. He's taken the plurality of them over the past month. Why is that? Well, to be clear, it might be because JD is more on a loser position. He's trying to seek the higher ground, okay? But much like Anakin in Star Wars, he might get felted and burned to a crisp. He might make it out alive, but the point is that maybe this is not the best tactic. Now, I've seen these interviews, the one with ABC, the one with Dana Bash with CNN, and the other one. Anyway, he did pretty well, but the problem with these interviews is that they have him on the back foot the entire time, which again is expected. These are opposition media figures, but the point being is that, you know, he's not... They're more hostile to him than they might be to Trump, honestly, but maybe I'm tripping. The point being, though, is that he has the least approval out of the four people on the screen. Too bad. But anyway, let's see why this is a negative aspect for Donald Trump. So polling VP nominees is a very niche cottage industry, but I'll tell you what I've been able to find recently. And there was a poll composed by Marist Poll for NPR and PBS, which is not a good poll, but it gives you a vague idea as to where the wind's blowing. Again, you stick your wet finger up. You don't know exactly what degree the wind's coming from, but you have a vague idea. So that's what we're going to do here. Basically, there was a survey, like I said, by NPR. And you'll notice that 1,600 adults were polled between August 1st and the 4th, so about a week ago. And you'll notice that Vance's net favorability actually fell by another 5 percentage points as compared to the poll done in July when he was first picked. So in the span of less than a month, give it maybe 17 days, his approval went down 5, which is to say that the more people knew about him, it went down by 5. Now, the only cope I can think about this is maybe Republicans already knew who he was and Democrats didn't. So when Democrats figured out who he was, they hated him, which they would have done anyway. And so maybe he's not actually, there's no love lost with the people that are supposed to vote for JD. But it's also, again, a cope, and it's just wishful thinking on my end. So I'm going to be clear about this. That being said, though, in July, he was already -3, which again is still better than Trump. Again, Trump is at -8. But it seems like JD is at -9. Again, worse than Donald. Barely, but still real. Okay? So what that basically means is that JD is adding absolutely no votes to Donald Trump and is in fact losing him a little bit. Which, again, a VP isn't supposed to really, get you many votes or lose you many votes, no matter who it is. Just much like, obviously, if you have Patrick Mahomes and a really bad backup quarterback, that's still ideal over an average quarterback and a great backup, obviously. And that being said, if the backup quarterback is like, ankle biting the main guy, then clearly this is a big liability. I'm not saying JD is doing this, but maybe that does partially explain why there's a perceived oasis for the Democrats, where they have a perceived border that is more like shredded cheese. It's a complete cacophony of disaster, even in the polling. Again, Biden was down -30, and the Harris policy is no better than Biden. Okay, now we also have crime, which is also a big issue. And then again, you have an issue with the economy and inflation, namely, which is not getting better. In fact, unemployment is going up, even though I think the record is already cooked on that front. So anyway, the point is that, Harris has a bad deck of cards, and it seems like instead of just showing what she has, they're just not surveying it. They're not doing polls for, again, several days. It's been 4 days. It's very odd. So what I'll tell you is that JD is definitely partially to blame here, because obviously he's not, he's all right. I kind of like him, but the point is that like his baggage is hurting Trump, which is odd because, again, Trump is kind of Teflon, but maybe the Teflon doesn't extend to other people next to him is the issue. Here is not an Achilles heel, but there's definitely a sore thumb in the Trump campaign right now. And this is the JD platform positions from when he was a senator and also a couple years before that. So as people in the know, and I've been acquainted with people that know JD for years now, I think personally that there have been things that, these people on the national conservative side of things are certainly having these positions that are somewhat bad to have, because not because they're horrible positions. I agree with a lot of them, but the issue is the way that the media will spin it makes them seem kind of often weird. And obviously what happens here is what I have on screen. So for example, JD says he has pro-family policies. Now, these policies are, again, not that crazy. Like, oh, we need more births or whatever. And that's obvious to anybody who has a sense of scope and history. That being said, a lot of these get spun the wrong way. And again, what he's saying here to rebut these claims by the mainstream media is not bad. He's also not being super convincing either. So it's an interesting dynamic where, again, JD is an accomplished Yale Law School graduate, very impressive academically. Rhetorically, again, not so much impressive, but definitely competent. But again, not having the aura that Trump has, who again comes off a lot lower IQ, but still with a gravitas that is hard to even describe. Which is to say, obviously, that JD being pushed on these issues that he appraised like 3 years ago is definitely a liability. Like if they said, okay, JD, what do you think about this niche IVF position you had 2 years ago? Again, a liability. Anyway. So let's get into the major sphere of attack by the veteran JD Vance, okay? So he was in the Marines, obviously. Not anything cool, though. I think he was like I wouldn't say paper pushing, but basically he didn't kill anyone. But anyway, this is an interesting, touchy subject, obviously, for politics. You see that JD went after Walz, and Walz is a guy who apparently served in the National Guard for about 24 years, okay? Now, Walz has been criticized in the past, again, mainly by JD as a veteran himself, saying like, hey, you exaggerated about your record in this instance, this instance, this instant. And again, this was like, while he was a politician, 2018, this era. The point being is that he said things that would exaggerate his record. So it strikes a note as stolen valor. That's the directionality of the allegation. That being said, when you look into the details, it's kind of convoluted. When discussing gun control, Walz says that he didn't want people to have weapons of war like he carried in war, which is, again, he wasn't in a shooting exchange with anybody. That wasn't like an assimilation, So it's like a facetious thing to say, obviously. It's like if you're a virgin, you're like, oh, I totally did this during... And it's like, no, you have not been in the heat. Trust me, okay? So anyway, when it comes down to the Army National Guard, the allegation is that Walz knew that he was going to be deployed with his buddies in Minnesota to Iraq, but he basically stepped out opportunistically saying like, oh, I'm not going to actually risk my life. And the Democrats will retort and say, well, he only had to serve 20 years. And so he stayed another 4, not consecutively, by the way. And so that all of a sudden makes it okay. I say I don't really even care, to be clear, because again, I'm not a veteran. It's not like it's a personal thing, but JD can say that. Now, this is something that is still brewing. It's still cooking. We'll see how that affects the polls. If God bless the people that make the polls, but can we get one, please? Because it's been 4 days in an election cycle that is life-changing, the biggest one of my life. Now, I'm only 21, but still. But anyway, but to be less verbose, on CNN, Vance accused Walz of lying about his own record and said his military service was for political gain. So kind of like Pete Buttigieg when you look into his record. Anyway, I'm not criticizing his service. I'm criticizing dishonesty. Dishonesty spoken in favor and for the purpose of political benefit, Vance said. So there you go. He's accusing this guy, Walz, of stolen valor. Will that stick? We're not really sure. It would hardly make a difference either way. Obviously, it's the VP nominee for the left. So anyway, so to get to the bottom of this. So when we are exploring right now in the lack of polls to fill in time, to tide you guys. Okay, so what is the preemptive question here? What is causing this perceived media storm over, wow, Trump is going to lose. Oh my God, guys, we're so back. Liberals, we're so up. Okay. This is mostly cap, okay? You just see it by the fact they're not doing polling. If Harris were winning in the polls, damn right they'd be showing that, but they're not. So that in and of itself shows that Trump is not doing that bad. That being said, though, are there contributing factors as to why Trump is definitely not as good right now to be president? Percentage-wise, as compared to right after the debate performance or after the Butler incident, you can totally see why it's the case that, again, Trump is not as likely to win as he was 3 or 4 weeks ago, which is completely understandable. That being said, is he still likely to win? Yes, probably. I'd say his odds of winning right now are like 70 or so percentage points. That being said, the betting odds are different, and I might tackle that another day. The point being, though, is that Harris being up right now is indicative of jack squat. And to really elaborate here, when it really comes down to it, The truth is that, again, Trump was leading Biden by over 3 in the polling, and now that's a 4-point swap to the left here. But I don't think these are real numbers. That being said, what are contributing factors like I was referring to? JD Vance is hurting Donald Trump for sure right now. This could change. JD has been getting better, okay? He, as a speaker, was probably like a 4 out of 10 when he first got picked as VP. I'd say he's up to a 6 now. What he's really missing is the aura, which, again, a lot of young people say, and I think it's actually true in this case, where you need like a visceral kind of swag. And again, I'm going back to millennial lingo, but the truth is that you do need something there, okay? You got to think, what separates Snoop Dogg from like some weed head loser, okay? They just talk a little different. There's a little bit of a charisma there. With like Snoop, and I guess with Trump too. Like, again, he's not the strongest talker, or he is the strongest talker, but he's not the smartest one, if that makes sense. He's not like a legalistic mind in that case. The point being, though, is that if JD can actually get his stuff together and kind of like work into this whole vibe, I think he could actually be a buoy for Trump, where he's going to do a lot of grunt work. And by grunt work, I mean talking to all these adversarial people in politics, doing rallies and kind of living with the people in the crowds. And I totally can see that happening. It just depends on how that shakes out. So as of right now, like I said, you look at the polling, you see that obviously Trump is at negative 8.2. Vance is at negative 9.4. It's very clear to me that Vance is holding Trump down a little bit. Now, is this a deal breaker at all? No. And as of right now, I would say JD Vance being picked is hurting Trump's odds by maybe 2 or 3 percentage points. But like I said, Trump's already up like 2 to 3 odds in my head. And so that's that. So let's just fill this in real quick for the people that are curious. So Battleground state-wise, according to my logic, I think that actually Trump would probably win Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. Again, Harris copied Trump's policy of the no tax on tips. We'll see how copycat Kamala, that whole mantra, will stick onto her campaign. But as of right now, I think that Trump would win it regardless of that. North Carolina, again, a Republican state, tried and true. We have Wisconsin also going red. We have Pennsylvania going red. I have Michigan. Again, I'm very torn on Michigan. I cannot make two ends of it. But to be clear, if you're winning 2 out of 3, odds are you're getting the third. Okay, this is just basic logic. Maybe it's an IQ test at this point. But Trump at 312, Harris Walz 226. And you know, honestly, you might see this prediction literally every single time you click on my video, but this is like the most likely scenario. I could get into the weeds about Nebraska 2nd District, and I can talk to you about the Omaha suburbs. I know you don't care, so like the video if you don't care. But anyway, Maine also, you've got that concreted. You also have New Hampshire is also blue. That's just the way it is, folks. So as the cookie crumbles, that is that. And also, thank you so much for the massive support on my most recent upload, as obviously I didn't expect that. You get lucky sometimes. Hopefully we can score again. See y'all on the next one. Adios.